I saw blood on my hands and thought, oh my God, what have I done? But don't worry, no one died, not yet. It was beet juice. Beet juice that sprayed when I wrestled a bottle of industrial weed killer out of my neighbor's hands, because she was trying to poison my harvest. Her name is Diane Wellington, 54, HOA president, and the kind of woman who believes every square inch of land within her eyesight belongs to her soul. You ever met someone like that? Someone so entitled, so drunk on fake power they'd rather ruin something beautiful than admit they can't control it? Well, I did. And I didn't just meet her. I locked her in my root cellar. Yeah, you heard me right. I locked a human being inside a concrete box because she tried to destroy the land my grandfather and I both loved. And now she's suing me for $2 million. But what if I told you that what started as a petty land dispute ended up uncovering one of the biggest environmental cover-ups in state history? That her war against my chickens and tomatoes was just a smokescreen to hide something way darker, something buried deep in the soil, beneath my feet and under layers of lies? Yeah, I didn't think I'd be the guy to crack open a chemical conspiracy. But here we are. So grab a seat, because by the end of this story you might just agree with me when I say, sometimes locking a Diane in your root cellar is exactly the right thing to do. From city lights to country soil, the dream that started it all. 3 years ago, if you had told me I'd be chasing chickens across a Minnesota field in muddy boots, wearing flannel and arguing with an HOA president named Diane, I'd have laughed in your face. Back then, I was a software engineer living in a high-rise in downtown Chicago. Commute? Brutal. Coffee budget? Embarrassing. Soul? Dying slowly between deadlines and microwave dinners. The only greenery in my life was a $17 0-cent basil plant on my windowsill, and even that thing hated me. Then I got the call. Grandpa had passed. Left me the farm, 5 acres of memories, tucked into a sleepy patch of rural Minnesota. Now, I hadn't been there since I was a kid, back when summers smelled like tomato vines and laundry on the line. But suddenly the idea of trading traffic jams for tractor oil didn't sound so crazy. So I did it. Sold the condo, gave notice at work, packed everything I owned into a U-Haul with more ambition than experience, and drove straight into a new chapter. And folks, when I say it was beautiful, I mean it. A 1,930s farmhouse that creaked like it had secrets. A root cellar cool as a whisper in summer. A chicken coop that looked like it had survived 2 wars and a tornado, but still stood strong. I didn't just inherit land. I inherited legacy. The same soil my grandfather worked with his hands, the same view from the porch he used to tell stories on. It felt sacred, like finally stepping into the version of life that fit me right. The first 6 months were pure magic. I coded during the day, gardened in the evening, slept like I hadn't in years. My neighbors were sweet, the eggs were fresh, and my biggest worry was whether I'd overwatered the heirloom tomatoes. But paradise doesn't last forever. Not when you live next to someone like Diane Wellington. And trust me, when Diane showed up, everything changed. She didn't knock, she arrived. And what started as a passive-aggressive comment about my chickens turned into something far worse. Before I get into that mess, if you've ever had a nightmare neighbor or just love a good rural revenge story, hit that like button, drop your own HOA horror tale in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. This one's about to get wild. The first time I saw Diane Wellington, she was wearing white yoga pants, a matching visor, and what I swear were hiking boots that had never touched dirt. She was standing just off my property line, holding a clipboard like it was a weaponized Bible, glaring at my chicken coop like it had personally offended her sense of suburban order. I was elbow deep in compost when she cleared her throat. Laughed twice. You know, she said, not even bothering with a hello, some of us moved out here for the peace and quiet. I smiled, assuming she was joking. She wasn't. Apparently, my hens were loud, my garden chaotic, and my fence non-compliant with the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. Now mind you, we're in rural Minnesota. There are more cows than people here. Aesthetic harmony means your barn is still standing after a windstorm. But Diane came from HOA land, somewhere between Stepford and Step Too Far, and she brought every ounce of that energy with her. Within 2 weeks, I got 3 courtesy notices from the county. One about the height of my tomato cages, one about suspicious compost activity, and one questioning whether my chicken coop was code safe. Coincidence? Nope. Sheriff Donahue, God bless him, told me that woman files more paperwork than the DMV. When the letters didn't get me to comply, she switched tactics. Lavish garden parties popped up on her lawn, complete with string quartets and cucumber water. I wasn't invited, of course, but my elderly neighbor Helen was. She pulled me aside one day and whispered like we were in a spy movie. She told everyone your chickens attract foxes, and that your urban energy is bringing down land values. I didn't even know I had urban energy. Then came the real punch. A man in a suit showed up offering to buy my farm. No logo on his car, no real smile, just a briefcase and a lowball offer that wouldn't even cover what I'd spent on fencing. Off the record, he said, the buyer has influence with the local HOA. Translation, Diane. She wanted me gone. And not with pitchforks or protest signs. No, that wasn't her style. She wanted me priced out, regulated out, rumor milled out. But she made one mistake. She underestimated the root cellar. And me. It started small. A clipped hose here. A few compost bags mysteriously slashed open. At first I thought it was just bad luck. Then I found a dead tomato plant, with a strange white powder sprinkled all around it, like powdered sugar from hell. That was the day I stopped believing in coincidence. So, I did what any modern farmer does when faced with agricultural warfare. I installed more cameras than a Vegas casino. And let me tell you, those cameras paid off. A few nights later, around 2:14 a.m., motion sensors picked something up near the chicken coop. I rolled out of bed, heart racing, and pulled up the feed. There she was, Diane Wellington, in a full tracksuit, crouched like a budget Bond villain, releasing what looked like a fox from a cage. A fox. Like a literal predator. I couldn't believe it. She wasn't just trying to scare me, she was trying to end my hens. Luckily, the co-op was reinforced tighter than Fort Knox, no casualties. But the message was clear. Diane had declared war. Not with bullets, but with burrowers. I brought the footage to Sheriff Donahue the next morning. He watched the video, rubbed his temples, and sighed like a man who wished he'd retired just 1 year earlier. She's smart, he said. Nothing conclusive, no face shot, no clear ID. But it's her, I said. He nodded slowly. Yep, but this ain't TV, Mason. I can't arrest a woman for having a suspicious gait. So now it was official. I was under siege. And the law couldn't or wouldn't help. But I wasn't about to lose my crops to a clipboard vigilante with a personal vendetta against vegetables. I reinforced the greenhouse, upgraded the cellar locks, installed silent alarms and infrared triggers. And through it all, I kept farming. Because every carrot I pulled from the soil, every jar of pickled beets I stacked in the cellar, it was proof that her sabotage wasn't working. That's when the rumors started. At the gas station, a stranger asked, "You really growing weed in that cellar?" At the diner, someone said, "Heard you got some hydroponic activity going on." Turns out Diane had pivoted to whisper campaigns. Illegal crops, shady transactions. Suddenly, I was the threat to the neighborhood. And once again, the sheriff showed up, this time to inspect the property. I led him down to the root cellar, flicked on the light, and showed him what illegal farming really looked like. Potatoes, beets, onions, and 24 jars of raspberry preserves, all labeled, all legal. He apologized. Again, "I hate to say this," he said, "but I think she's trying to wear you down." She was. But she'd miscalculated. Because what Diane didn't know was that my grandfather hadn't just left me 5 acres of land. He'd left me blueprints. to something she would soon regret ever messing with. I always imagined that if I ever caught someone sabotaging my property, I'd react with fire, rage, yelling, a righteous storm of curse words and camera footage. But that's not what happened. Because when the moment came, I was calm. Too calm, maybe. It was a Thursday night in late October, cold enough that your breath came out in little ghosts, but warm enough that I'd left the root cellar unlocked for just a few hours while moving crates of preserves. I was upstairs reviewing some code when my phone buzzed. Motion alert. Root cellar. 11:13 p.m. I tapped the notification, and there she was. Diane Wellington, wearing all black like she was sneaking into a casino vault. In one hand, a flashlight between her teeth. In the other, a tote bag the size of a toddler, and judging by how she lugged it, just as heavy. She knelt by the old padlock, the decoy, and picked it with the precision of someone who'd done this before. But what she didn't know was that behind that rusty old lock was a second electronic deadbolt connected directly to my phone. And the moment she stepped inside, I had a decision to make. She walked into the cellar, pulled out a massive jug. I squinted. Weed killer. The industrial kind, the kind that has warning labels in 3 languages and a skull on the side. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, jaw clenched. Then I thought of my grandfather, of the crops, of everything she'd already done, the whispers, the fox, the gnome incident. I hit the button. Click. The electronic lock snapped shut. Diane froze, then spun toward the door. The handle rattled. Once, twice. Then came the screaming. "Let me out! I'll sue! I have right!" It was a one-woman Broadway audition for villains who get caught. I sipped my coffee and called the sheriff, calmly explained I had a trespasser in my cellar, caught in the act, not in danger, just contained. Donahoggy, to his credit, didn't flinch. "I'll be there in 45. Don't engage, just watch her." So I did. And oh, what a show. She called someone, husband probably, paced the cellar, tried to pour the chemicals down the drain, not realizing that I'd installed a containment tank for that exact reason. And then came the line, the moment I'll never forget. I looked at my screen and saw it, beet juice dripping down her arm. She'd knocked over a crate of pickled beets. Red liquid everywhere, her face pale, her hands stained. She looked at them and screamed, "Oh my God, what have I done?" For a full 5 seconds, I thought she thought it was blood. I actually laughed out loud. That was the moment. Right there, that ridiculous, terrifying karmic moment. When I realized this was no longer about vegetables. This was about truth. So, I waited. Camera rolling. Cellar secure. Justice just 30 minutes away. They say land has memory. Turns out, so does beet juice. Because that sticky red trail Diane left behind, it wasn't just a mess. It was the breadcrumb that led me to the truth. Let me back up. After Sheriff Donahue hauled Diane out of my root cellar, still ranting about her constitutional right to trespass in yoga pants, the house got quiet. Too quiet. Gregory, her husband, and apparently the Wellington family's damage control unit hung back for a moment. His lawyer instincts finally kicked in, but so did something else. Guilt, maybe? Or self-preservation? "I think you should look into the property history," he said. I asked, "Anything I should know?" He hesitated, then with a sigh muttered, "The name Wellington doesn't just come from boutiques and beach homes. My wife's family used to run Wellington Chemicals before it was sold off." The pieces started clicking into place like an old padlock. So the next morning I did some digging. Not into the soil, not yet, into the archives. And what I found? Terrifying. Old zoning records, buried EPA reports, county land assessments from the 70s. And sure enough, my grandfather's land, my land, had once been part of a larger industrial property owned by Wellington Chemicals. What kind of company? Let's just say not the kind that bottles kombucha. They produced herbicides, solvents, Things with names you can't pronounce without a chemistry degree and a hazmat suit. Records showed temporary chemical storage on multiple parcels, including the exact spot my root cellar now stood. That's when I called Olivia Harper, environmental consultant, former EPA field scientist. Also, friend, and possibly the only person I trusted not to gaslight me with HOA bylaws. She brought a team out the next day, suits, soil samplers, gear that beeped and clicked and made my heart sink with every number that popped up. They tested everything. And when Olivia returned that evening, her face said it all. "We found it, Mason," she said softly. "Heavy metals, PCBs, the whole toxic cocktail. Your garden, the cellar, they're hot." Suddenly, the heirloom tomatoes I'd canned, the carrots I'd eaten straight from the dirt, they weren't just food. They were potential evidence. Or worse, biohazards. It was crushing. I stood on my porch that night staring at the land I loved. My grandfather had spent decades here trying to grow something beautiful out of soil that had been poisoned before he ever laid a shovel in it, and now I was the one who finally uncovered the truth. And Diane? She wasn't just a petty HOA villain anymore. She was the face of a cover-up, one that stretched decades, one that endangered lives. The irony? If she had just left me alone, I might never have discovered any of it. But her obsession, her sabotage, her weed killer tantrum, that's what triggered it all. And now? Now it was my turn to dig deeper. Because if this soil could remember, it was about time the world remembered what Wellington Chemicals tried to bury. The funny thing about truth, once it starts to leak out, it doesn't stop. Like the rust-colored seepage we found in the test well behind the root cellar, or the look on Diane's face when the EPA flagged her family's name in a federal environmental database. After Olivia's report confirmed what we feared, decades-old industrial toxins sitting quietly under my vegetables, we didn't just have a soil issue. We had a case, a landmark one. And of course, Diane responded the only way she knew how, with a lawsuit. $2 million filed against me for wrongful detainment, reputational harm, and emotional trauma caused by unlawful confinement in a hostile structure. Yeah. She called my root cellar a hostile structure. This from the woman who tried to bleach my beets. My attorney laughed out loud when he read the filing. Then he got real quiet, leaned forward and said, "Actually, this might work in our favor. If she wants a trial, let's give her one." And boy, did we. The trial made headlines before the jury was even sworn in. Local news loved the hook. Farmer lacks HOA president in root cellar. Uncovers buried toxic past. National news loved the twist. Boutique chain heiress linked to environmental scandal. And social media, forget it. Root cellar justice. Justice beats all. Diane down under. It was a whole vibe. In court, Diane sat perfectly still. Designer suit, professionally blow-dried hair, courtroom scowl locked and loaded. She looked like a woman trying to keep her empire from crumbling. But we had a foundation stronger than appearances. We had science. We had documents. We had that security footage of her with the weed killer. And now we had a whole team of witnesses. From EPA officials to former Wellington Chemical employees, to a 78-year-old night guard who testified under oath that we dumped barrels back there at night. I didn't ask questions. They paid extra. Game, set, match. When the judge read the verdict, guilty on all counts, Diane didn't flinch, but I saw her lawyer exhale like a man who just realized he'd backed the wrong horse in the 7 years. Federal prison. $4.5 million in fines, and my personal favorite, a court-mandated public apology printed in 3 major newspapers. That was the moment I stopped feeling like a victim and started feeling like a guardian, not just of my land, but of the truth. Because that courtroom didn't just bring justice for me, it cracked open decades of silence. Suddenly, other families came forward, other properties were tested. What Diane tried to hide in my backyard became a statewide reckoning. And me? I went back home, to my porch, to my chickens who still don't lay eggs where Diane's SUV used to park. And I waited, because we weren't done. The trial was over, but healing the land, that was just beginning. I stood at the edge of what used to be my garden, boots sinking slightly into the newly cleared soil. Where once tomatoes thrived and bees buzzed lazily through lavender, there were now bright orange flags, environmental monitoring stations, and hazmat-suited workers collecting core samples like archaeologists at a toxic dig site. This wasn't farming. This was fallout. But healing, real healing, it doesn't start pretty. The EPA, the State Environmental Board, Olivia's firm, they all agreed on one thing. If we were going to save this land, we had to rebuild it from the roots up, literally. So, I handed over the reins, temporarily. They dug, they scraped, they filtered. They took away 3 feet of topsoil across large sections of the property, replacing it with carefully tested, nutrient-rich earth. The groundwater was filtered, monitored. Phytoremediation crops, sunflowers, mustard greens, and Indian grass were planted first to pull out what still lingered. My job? Wait, learn, document, had dream a new dream. Olivia came by most days, clipboard in hand, her boots just as muddy as mine. Somewhere between testing cadmium levels and debating compost ratios, we became more than just soil nerds. She started leaving her lab gear on the porch. I started making 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. One night, under the stars, surrounded by potted plants, we were testing for heavy metals, she said. You know, this place could be more than just clean. It could teach people how to heal. And something clicked. But the farm wasn't just restored. What if it became a model? An open-air classroom, a sustainable agriculture showcase, a place where people could come to learn that even poisoned ground can be redeemed. I started sketching plans. A greenhouse rebuilt with reclaimed materials, raised beds filled with clean soil designed to grow heirlooms again, a small museum in the root cellar, yes, that root cellar, documenting the fight, the history, and the science behind our revival. And at the center, a plaque, dedicated to every voice that stood up when no one else would. Soon, volunteers showed up, neighbors who once believed Diane's gossip, now eager to help. Mrs. Kellerman brought her grandkids to plant lemon balm. Lynn installed solar panels on the tool shed. And one teenager asked if he could paint a mural on the side of the barn. I asked what he had in mind. He said, a phoenix, rising out of roots instead of fire. We put it up the next week. By spring, we'd harvested our first safe crop, just herbs and greens, but they tasted like hope. Sweet, slightly peppery hope. I sold them at the farmer's market under a new name, Rooted Revival Farms. In that tagline, we don't just grow food, we grow second chances. Funny thing about root cellars, they're meant to preserve what matters most, quietly, steadily, beneath the surface. Turns out, they do more than preserve vegetables. Sometimes, they preserve a fight, a legacy, and, if you're lucky, a comeback story for the ages. It took almost a full year to make the place whole again. But when we finally opened the cellar door, this time not to Diane's chaos, but to a new chapter, it wasn't just a return to what was. It was something better. We kept the bones of the old space, the stone walls, the cool, earthy air. The little compost toilet my grandpa had rigged up still sat in the corner, now polished, functional, and, weirdly, a fan favorite on tours. But we added new things too. Where pickling jars once lined the shelves, we installed display cases. One held laminated photos of the original garden and security stills of Diane mid-break-in, herbicide in hand. Another held soil samples, side by side, then and now. And yes, right up front, in a little glass cube with LED lighting and a brass label, was the infamous bottle itself. Weed killer, 1 gallon. Introduced with malice, preserved as a lesson. It was poetic, and a little petty, but mostly poetic. School groups came. So did city council members, farmers, environmental researchers. One man flew in from Oregon just to see the cellar that took down an empire. And in the guest book we left at the cellar entrance, someone scribbled in all caps, "This place turned a villain into a warning and a farm into a legacy." I couldn't have said it better myself. I still remember standing there the day we reopened, Olivia beside me, holding my hand, Glenn handing out lemonade from a thermos that looked older than I was. Neighbors wandered through slowly, some wiping away tears. One woman asked if she could kneel down and touch the floor. "My dad worked for Wellington Chemicals," she whispered. "I always wondered where all of that stuff ended up. Now I know, and now it's healed." That night, I sat on the porch under a wide Minnesota sky. The air was clean. The stars were bright. And in the distance I could hear laughter from the farm's new community garden, planted over ground that had once been poisoned, now blooming like it had something to prove. Diane's name hadn't been spoken in weeks. Not out of fear, out of irrelevance. People don't talk much about ghosts once they stop haunting. So if you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for believing that justice doesn't always come in courtrooms. Sometimes it shows up in kale beds, classroom field trips, and jars of pickled beets made from soil that almost wasn't saved. And if you've got a story about fighting for what's yours, even if it starts with a neighbor and ends with a community, drop it in the comments. We're all ears. Because here at Rooted Revival Farms, we don't just grow food. We grow stories. And this was the one that brought us home again. Like, share, subscribe, and remember, no matter how deep the damage, there's always a root worth saving.